Hello, I'm Dr. Darnell, and welcome to this video about neoclassical theory. At the end of this session, you will be able to summarize neoclassical management theory and its components, discuss the role and contributions of the neoclassical approach, identify the advantages and disadvantages of neoclassical management, and summarize an example of neoclassical management. In the early 1920s, neoclassical management theory emerged as a shift away from classical management theory. Management theorists took the concept of classical theory and added in ideas from social science. Neoclassical theory considers the human side of an organization and the social needs of employees. In this video session, you'll learn about the evolution of neoclassical management theory and its two sources, the human relations movement and the behavioral movement. Rather than view workers as automatons whose performance rises in response to better pay, neoclassical organization theory says the personal, emotional, and social aspects of work are stronger motivators. Human relations management arose from the work of sociologists and social psychologists who studied how people relate and interact within groups. Behavioral management came from various psychologists who focused on the individual behavior of employees. The human relations movement was a direct result of Elton Mayo and Fritz J. Rosenberger's Hawthorne study, which were designed to find ways to increase worker productivity at Western Electric's Hawthorne factory. George Elton Mayo, 1880 to 1949, was the founder of the human relations movement and primary researcher of the Hawthorne study. He published his findings in a 1933 book titled Human Problems of an Industrialized Civilization. Fritz Rosenberger, 1898 to 1974, was a social scientist and professor at Harvard Business School. He was also a researcher for the Hawthorne study and published his findings in a 1937 book entitled Management and the Worker. The Hawthorne experiments, later referred to as the Hawthorne studies, were conducted from 1924 to 1933 at Western Electric Company's Hawthorne Works, just outside of Chicago, Illinois. The result of the work was a game changer for the management theory approach, as it was a shift away from the deeply entrenched classical approach to management. The first experiment was conducted by a group of Western Electric engineers who were looking at what effects lighting levels had on employee performance. The result of the study showed that even as lighting levels decreased, employee performance continued to increase. When it seemed that every change they made improved performance, the company wondered if constant change was stimulating employees to work harder. Trying to figure it out, they consulted with Elton Mayo and Fritz Rosenberger, who figured out that the test group performed better because management treated them better. Not only was the company paying them more attention, the group supervisor talked to them and interacted with them as individuals. Mayo interviewed the group and realized that they saw themselves as a united team. Financial incentives didn't seem to matter, but the support and approval of their colleagues on the team mattered a great deal. As a result, Mayo concluded that the classical model was flawed. It approached the workplace as if it could be organized on pure logic. But in reality, personal, non-logical, and informal arrangements played just as big a role in productivity. The neoclassical theory of management was built around treating workers as people. Eventually, Mayo and Roethlisberger attributed the increase in productivity to the higher morale that was witnessed in the group during the experiment. This morale and productivity boost was indirectly caused by the changes the researchers made to the working conditions. Mayo and Roethlisberger concluded that worker productivity increased due to a feeling of value workers experienced when managers and co-workers showed additional attention that was really in sharp contrast to the idea that money was the best way to motivate employees to work at higher levels, which was a common perception at the time. In fact, financial rewards were found to be much less conducive to worker motivation and productivity than fulfilling their social and human relations needs. The Hawthorne studies paved the way for behavioral management theory and have significantly shaped the manner in which employees' motivation is accounted for in the workplace. Mayo's conclusions from almost a century ago are commonplace now, but radical at the time. Among the findings of the Hawthorne studies were: 1. Supervisors needed to have good interpersonal skills. 2. Supervisors and managers should be trained in listening and interviewing skills. 3. Workers' personal problems and issues are a factor in the workplace. 4. If workers feel they have some control, they will perform better. 5. Workers should be given opportunities to express any frustrations they have with the job. 6. Bonding co-workers is a big part of job satisfaction for most employees. 7. A feeling of worth improves performance more than changes to working conditions. 8. Focusing purely on efficiency and ignoring the human factor will not improve performance. Conclusions from the Hawthorne studies. Mayo wasn't the first person to express these ideas, but the Hawthorne experiments went a long way towards showing the world that they were valid. During the 20th century, Other management theorists develop Mayo's critique of the classical model and develop elements of the neoclassical management approach. Human beings aren't robots. No matter how logically you structure an organization, human behavior can disrupt it. Informal rules and arrangements affect how work is done more than formal structure. Rigid division of labor isolates workers, particularly those assigned to insignificant jobs. Note, the classical approach looks different on paper, but is less effective in practice. A manager's authority is based partly on his personal skills. It can't be reduced to a universal ratio like one manager can handle up to 10 people. Individual employees and managers have goals, and they may not be the same as the goals of the organization. And communication is important. Lines of communications have to be open and known to everyone, and they should be as short and as direct as possible. The Hawthorne Effect. Behavior observed in the Hawthorne studies became known as the Hawthorne Effect. The Hawthorne Effect is a psychological phenomenon in which participants in behavioral studies change their behavior or performance in response to being observed by the individual conducting the study. The term Hawthorne Effect was derived from observations noted in the first Hawthorne experience, also known as the observer effect. A second series of experiments based on the original experiment was conducted a few years later by Mayo and Roethlisberger, who supervised a group of women in a bank wiring or money transfer room. As part of the experiment, the women were given special privileges, such as periodic breaks from work, free lunches, and pay increase incentives. The study also resulted in increased employee performance. Mayo and Roethlisberger did not attribute the increased performance to special privileges. Rather, they concluded that the increased levels of productivity were a result of the supervisory arrangement. That is, because the experiment placed the observers in close proximity to 5 women being observed, the interest in the workers on the part of the observers is what increased the 5 women's motivation to modify performance. The 5 women wanted to be seen as high performers by the observers. In the workplace, the Hawthorne Effect can explain how more attention an employee receives from managers, co-workers, and customers, the higher level of effort and employee productivity there may be. Essentially, productivity increases when employees think that they are being watched or observed closely. Neoclassical advantages. The advantages is that more benefit to employees and organizations than prior theories. For management theorists, a great benefit of neoclassical theory is its improvement on classical management theory. The classical theory ignored human element, whereas the neoclassical approach took individuals and their needs into account. Neoclassical theory changed the mindset of management that could and should be entirely mechanistic and logical. Insights of the neoclassical organization theory were essential to all later theories, such as systems theory and contingency theory. Everything that came later built on the neoclassical core. Neoclassical research drew psychologists and sociologists into the study of management, making the discipline stronger, opening an interdisciplinary study of management. Neoclassical disadvantages. One criticism of the neoclassical theory of management is that neoclassical theory never stood on its own. It was classical management theory with human insights added in. It built on classical thinking rather than breaking away or replacing it. It lacked scientific validity. The human relation drew conclusions from Hawthorne studies. These conclusions were based on clinical insight rather than scientific evidence. The groups chosen for the study were not representative in character of the whole company. The findings based on temporary groups do not apply to groups that have continuing relationship with one another. Another criticism is the neoclassical approach is decades old. It has become outmoded. Newer theories such as situational and contingency theory see limitations of the neoclassical management. Negative view of conflict between organizational and individual goals was seen as a negative, a distractor from this. If it views conflict between goals of the organization and those of individuals as destructive. The positive aspects of conflict, such as overcoming weaknesses and generation of innovative ideas, are ignored. Disadvantage is that it's too internal focus. It focuses on the organization and how it interacts with people in it. It doesn't consider the surrounding environment. It assumes there's one approach to running the company and that it will all work consistently in any environment. The behavioral movement in neoclassical management theory was established by later researchers building on Mayo's work, who were more rigorously trained in social sciences, so psychology, sociology, and anthropology, and used the more sophisticated research methods. These later researchers became known as behavioral scientists. Under the behavioral sciences approach, the knowledge was drawn from behavioral sciences. It focuses on human behavior and organization and seeks to promote verifiable propositions for scientific understanding of human behavior and in organization behavior, and stresses the development of human beings for the benefit of both the individual and the organization. Some of the characteristics of the behavioral management movement. Behavioral science approach is an interdisciplinary approach and integrates the knowledge drawn from different disciplines for the study of human behavior. This approach advocates that an organization is a socio-technical system which consists of individuals and their interpersonal and social relationships with each other, and on the other side, it consists of various techniques and methods and procedures used by them for performing their jobs. The behavioral approach recognizes individual differences in terms of their personality, goals, beliefs, values, and perception. The behavioral approach recognizes goal conflict in organization and suggests reconciliation of the goals of individual and the organization for effectiveness and efficiency of the organization. This approach emphasizes an informal group which exercise a significant influence on the attitudes and behavior and performance of employees. Behavioral science approach stressed upon group behavior, and group dynamics. Workers have their own informal groups, and they have their own norms, cultures, and communication system. This is broad-based and consists of multiple concepts such as motivation, leadership, communication, change and development, group dynamics, job redesign, etc. The behavioral approach provided new insight into human behavior. Let's review some of the key contributors to the behavioral movement. We explore many of them in other videos in this module. The behavioral school has drawn heavily on the work of Abraham Maslow. His development of the needs hierarchy to explain human behavior in the dynamics of motivation process is an important contribution. Douglas McGregor built on Maslow's work in explaining his theory X and theory Y. We cover this extensively in another video as well. Frederick Herzberg developed a two-factor theory of motivation. He made a distinction between the factors which either can cause or prevent job dissatisfaction, which he called hygiene factors, and those which actually do lead to motivation, which he called motivational factors. In the area of leadership, Robert Blake and Jane Mouton developed and popularized the managerial grid. Renus Likert has identified and extensively researched 4 management systems, which includes System 1, authoritative, System 2, benevolent authoritative, System 3, consultative, and System 4, group perspective. Each system characterizes an organizational climate by empowering several key dimensions of effectiveness, such as communication, motivation, leadership, and others. What are the advantages of behavior management approach? The study of human behavior is of great significance in management. Since an individual is a product of a social system, his behavior is not determined by organizational forces alone, but many forces like perception, attitudes, habit, social, cultural, environment also shape his behavior. Therefore, in understanding human behavior in the organization, all these factors must be taken into account. The behavioral approach suggests how knowledge of human behavior can be used in making people more effective in the organization. Behavioralists have enriched management theory through their contributions in areas of group dynamic, motivation, communication, and leadership. Behavioral guidelines have led to increased productivity and greater worker engagement. Behavior management disadvantages. While behaviorists have enriched management theory through their contributions in the areas of group dynamic, motivation, communication, and leadership, they have failed in developing an integrated theory of management. Although the study of human behavior in organizations is extremely important, management cannot be confined only to this area. There are other variables such as technology and environment that have an important bearing on the effectiveness of an organization. Behavioral sciences have not achieved precision as the physical sciences have. Often the complexities of the human factor and organizational setting make exact predictions impossible. It should also be noted that the findings of behavioral science research are tentative and require further investigation. They should not be treated as applicable to all situations. Behavioral guidelines can be helpful and profitable, but care must be taken not to accept them as being completely valid and applicable to all situations. Recent development took place in management theories after 1930. It was Chester Bernard who in 1938 provided a comprehensive explanation of the modern view of management and organization. He considered the individual organization, suppliers, and customers as part of the environment. The neoclassical modern approach included the following viewpoints. A quantitative approach. This approach gained prominence after World War II when the British formed an operational research team consisting of mathematicians, physicists, and other scientists who were brought together to solve organizational problems in operations. The systems approach to management attempts to view the organization as a unified, purposeful system composed of interrelated parts. This approach gives managers a way of looking at an organization as a whole whole and as part of a larger environment. The contingency approach. The latest approach to management, which integrates the various approaches, is known as the contingency or situational approach. This management theory attempts to determine the predictable relationships between situations and outcomes and focuses on interdependence of the various factors involved in a managerial situation. It is important to note that with the passage of time, the viewpoints have changed or modified. Each major contributor has brought new knowledge, awareness, and tools and techniques to understand the organization better. In the modern era, we are richer than ever before in terms of our knowledge about approaches to understanding organizations better. We'll explore each of these theories from neoclassical modern approach in more depth in other videos. Let's look at an example of the Hawthorne or the observer effect. Meet Tom. He's a young college graduate who was hired at Trekkie Technology about 6 months ago. Tom is miserable at Trekkie because he cannot stand the people that he works with. Jim is a pompous jerk. Mary is a constant complainer. Sarah spends more time gossiping than working with Tom's boss. Bill is never around when Tom needs him. Instead of focusing on his job, Tom spends much of his workday distracted, trying to keep his emotions in check so he does not tell his coworkers what he really thinks of them. Needless to say, Tom avoids these people at all costs, which is relatively easy to do to his coworkers' preoccupation with themselves and others keeping them away from their desk. Meet Jenny. She was in Tom's graduating class, but is employed at the Force Technology, a direct competitor of Trekkie Technology. Unlike Tom, Jenny loves her job, especially because of the people she works with. Jenny's always found the Force to be a great place to work because her coworkers and manager are supportive and work together to help each other succeed. Jenny's manager, Irene, considers herself a part of the team and even shares the same workspace as her subordinates. Jenny is able to focus on her work and ask questions when needed and is highly productive as a result. What makes Tom and Jenny so different? They both graduated from the same school. They both work for technology companies. However, what is clearly different in the social context in which they perform their work? Tom works in a distracting, negative work environment, whereas Jenny works in a supportive, inspiring work environment. Productivity is directly affected by these work environments. For Tom, productivity is diminished, but for Jenny, productivity increases, as she feels that she's working close with her supervisor. In this session, we summarize neoclassical management theory, including the human relations movement, the Hawthorne experiments, and the behavioral management approach, and the modern approach. We discussed the role and contributions of the neoclassical approach. We identified advantages and disadvantages of the neoclassical approach, and we summarized an example of neoclassical management. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.